The last light of dusk bled over the plains like a wounded sun, turning the tall grass into trembling gold. The wind moved through it in long sighs, as though it carried the memory of someone who once loved and was lost. Beneath the shadow of the distant mesas, an old soul might have sworn the land was waiting for a story it had known would come eventually, though it could not yet speak its name. The first spark of curiosity drifted with the dust as the day sank deeper into its own quiet heart. Beside a dying fire, Niska Whitefeather, age 50, knelt with her weathered hands pressed into the earth, as if asking the soil itself to bear her grief. Her shoulders trembled, though tears rarely found her any more. She had learned to ache in silence. In her lap lay a small pouch of white feathers, keepsakes of the man she once loved and lost, and tonight they felt heavier than ever. She whispered a confession to the open sky, one she had held back far too long, and the rawness of it broke the night's stillness. "No man wants to take my daughter as his wife," she breathed, her voice fraying like worn cloth at the edges. The fire cracked softly in response, as if the world itself disagreed with her despair. Inside the lodge behind her, Talla Whitefeather, age 20, sat alone beside a lantern whose flame quivered like a heartbeat unsure of its own strength. She traced the beadwork on her white and brown traditional dress, feeling every stitch as if it carried her mother's hopes, and also her mother's fears. Her long dark braids, decorated with small brown and white feathers, lay across her shoulders like gentle burdens she was born to carry. She had grown used to silence, but tonight's silence felt like a judgment. She wondered why beauty, when paired with gentleness, seemed invisible to the world that claimed to value strength. That thought pressed against her ribs with a cold insistence, and curiosity rose within her about whether a different path might yet find her. Niska's muffled sobs seeped through the hide walls like winter wind, each one slicing through Talla's chest until she could barely breathe. Talla wanted to stand, to comfort the woman who had carried her through storms and scarcity, but shame held her still. She had heard the whispers her whole life, that she was too quiet, too tall, too different, too much of her people for some, not enough for others. Each judgment clung to her, 100 invisible threads pulling her away from the future she once dared to imagine. Her lantern flickered low, and she closed her eyes, feeling something shift in the night around her. She did not yet understand that fate sometimes sneaks close when sorrow cracks open the heart. Far down the valley, dust lifted around the hooves of a bay horse as a lone rider approached the village. Dalton Reed, age 30, guided his mount with a tired grace, as though he had ridden through more disappointments than miles. His brown shirt clung to him with the day's heat, and his weathered hat cast soft shadows across his eyes. Something in his chest had been tugging him northward for days, a strange instinct, a dream he could not quite unravel, one in which a white feather drifted endlessly over a field. He followed that dream, unsure whether it promised trouble or deliverance, and curiosity beat in him like a second pulse. Dalton halted when he saw the faint ribbon of smoke rising from Niska's lodge. There was something sorrowful about the way it twisted into the darkening sky, like a cry with no voice. He felt a pull, not of duty but of compassion, and eased his horse forward. The night around him grew still, as though urging him onward. When he dismounted beside the lodge, he noticed the feathers tied at the entrance, one white, one brown, and his breath caught at the echo of his strange dream. The coincidence clung to him with a quiet insistence, urging him to step closer. He lifted a hand and called softly, "Ma'am? I mean no harm." His voice, roughened by dust and distance, carried warmth that eased its way under Niska's guarded sorrow. She turned toward him with red-rimmed eyes and, after a long moment, invited him to sit by the fire. Curiosity flickered in her expression. Why would a wandering cowboy speak so gently to a stranger when the world often taught men to be harsh? Dalton's gaze moved over her face, reading grief easily. "Someone's hurting," he said, not as a question, but as a truth he felt in the trembling air. Niska hesitated before answering, pride warring with the fear that had worn her down through years of watching her daughter be overlooked. "My daughter believes no man will take her hand," she finally whispered. The confession was as fragile as the feather pouch in her lap. Before Dalton could reply, the lodge flap stirred. Tala stepped outside, lantern glow shimmering over her cheekbones, her feathers catching the moonlight like whispers of snow. Dalton rose instinctively, struck silent by the sight of her, not because she was beautiful in some loud or obvious way, but because she carried a quiet dignity he had rarely seen. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world softened around them, the wind holding its breath as if stunned by the collision of two lonely souls. Tala's heart stuttered beneath his gaze. She felt as if he had seen through every layer of her shame in a single glance, not to judge her, but to understand her. It frightened her how deeply it stirred something long dormant. Dalton removed his hat again, voice gentler than before. "Evenin', miss." She nodded shyly, words caught somewhere between her throat and her heartbeat, unsure what to make of this stranger who looked at her like she was not invisible. Dalton lingered near the village for days after, offering small acts of help with a quiet sincerity, repairing fence posts, fetching water, helping steady aging horses. He never asked for anything in return. He simply left gentle marks on the world around him, and Tala watched from a distance, trying to understand the unfamiliar rhythm forming in her chest. Curiosity nudged her each time his smile found her across the firelight, soft as dawn slipping into a dim room. Slowly, she returned his gestures. She brought him cool water, wove a white feather into his saddle strap, and once when their hands brushed by accident, time seemed to stretch like warm amber between them. They spoke in the evenings. She told him stories of her father's bravery and the songs of the river. He told her of growing up alone, drifting from town to town like a leaf unsure where to land. Their connection thickened like the first threads of a woven blanket, fragile but warming. Still, Tala's doubt lingered like the shadow of an old storm. She feared that kindness could be temporary, that sweetness could sour once he saw all the parts of her she kept hidden. Dalton sensed the hesitation in her silences. One night, beneath a sky thick with stars, he told her quietly, "Sometimes a man finds what he didn't know he was looking for." His voice quivered with the risk of honesty. Tala dropped her gaze, unsure whether to trust the trembling warmth in her chest. Word eventually reached nearby ranchers that Dalton had remained among the tribe. Men rode by, jeering at him, mocking his choice, sneering at Tala's quiet nature. Their cruelty cut deeper than their laughter, clawing at the wounds Tala had tried to bury. That night, she fled to the river, staring at her wavering reflection. The feathers in her hair fluttered like uncertain wings. "Maybe he's better off without me," she whispered to the water. Dalton found her there, breathless from searching through the dark. When he approached, she flinched, expecting pity. Instead, he lowered himself into the grass beside her and said, "I don't care about the world's opinion. I care about you." His words, simple and unpolished, carried the weight of truth. In the days that followed, Dalton approached Niska with humility and trembling resolve. "I love your daughter," he told her. "If she'll allow me, I want to marry her." Niska studied his face, searching for any sign of fleeting affection, and found none. She placed her hand over his, her voice cracking. "Do not make promises and vanish with the dawn." Dalton shook his head. "This isn't a promise. It's a path." When he found Tala near the cottonwoods, he approached slowly. She turned, uncertainty soft in her eyes. He spoke her name as though it was something delicate he wished to shelter. "I don't want a life without you in it." His voice trembled, not with doubt but with reverence. He knelt, not out of tradition but out of love. "Will you marry me?" Her breath hitched, emotions flooding her all at once. Fear, longing, hope she had not dared to claim. She was opening her mouth to answer when thunder cracked overhead, the storm rolling in with a warning roar, scattering her words into the wind. But by morning, the storm had swept the world clean. Under a vast sky, the village gathered. feathers swayed in the breeze, drums pulsed like a heartbeat guiding the ceremony. Tala wore her beaded white and brown dress, her braids shining with light brown feathers gifted from her mother. Dalton stood opposite her, hat pressed to his chest, eyes softened with awe. Their hands were bound with braided cord, the elder's blessing washing over them like warm rain. "I choose you," Dalton whispered, voice shaking. "And I choose the man who saw me," Tala replied, her hands trembling. Their foreheads met, and the village erupted in song, feathers dancing in the wind as though nature itself approved. They built a life near the river, in a small cabin of timber and hope. Tala tended a garden where sage and wildflowers grew side by side. Dalton mended fences, saddled horses, and sometimes lifted her into his arms simply because he loved the way she laughed quietly into his shoulder. Their bond strengthened in gentle rituals, sharing morning tea, resting in the doorway as dusk brushed the horizon, holding each other through nights when fears resurfaced. But happiness, they learned, was not a destination. It was a choice made in every moment, often tender and trembling. Tala found herself transforming slowly, no longer the girl who believed she was unwanted, but a woman rooted in love that had chosen her fully. She often looked at Dalton and wondered how fate had led him to her mother's sorrowful whisper that night. One autumn evening, Tala stood beside Niska at sunset. The sky glowed amber, the mesas burning like embers. Dalton worked nearby, splitting wood, glancing at Tala with reverence he never outgrew. Niska touched her daughter's heart, voice shaking. "I was wrong that night," she murmured. "The Creator did not forget you." Tala leaned into her, whispering, "He brought me someone who saw me before I saw myself." Dalton walked toward them, wiping dust from his brow, eyes soft with devotion. Tala stepped to him, and he brushed a thumb against her cheek, kissing her forehead with a tenderness that made time itself pause. The wind caught the feathers in her hair, sending them rustling like quiet wings ready to lift into another chapter. And if someone were listening, some wanderer, some reader, they might hear a whisper carried on that same wind. There are hearts that will choose you before you ever choose yourself. Be patient. The love that belongs to you is already walking your way, steady and unhurried, waiting for the moment you finally believe you deserve to be found.